What really happens inside a coffin after burial? Could there be more to the silence than we ever imagined? For centuries, death has been veiled in mystery, shrouded in fear, and often spoken of only in hushed tones. It is the ultimate unknown, the one journey every living being will one day face. Yet, for all our technological advancements and scientific breakthroughs, the precise nature of what occurs beneath the Earth's surface after burial has remained an enigma, one that most dare not explore. What if, hidden in the darkness of a coffin, there is more than just decay? What if death itself holds secrets that could change everything we believe about life? Tonight, we unravel one of humanity's most unsettling questions. This is not a ghost story or a work of fiction. It is an exploration of reality, and the answers may haunt you forever. Imagine this: a quiet graveyard, the ground freshly turned, and the faint sound of wind rustling through the trees. Beneath the soil, a coffin lies still. But what if the stillness is an illusion? What if, right now, there's more happening in that box than we've ever dared to consider? It's a question that challenges not just our understanding of biology and physics, but also the very fabric of our beliefs about life, death, and the beyond. For one group of daring scientists, this question wasn't just theoretical, it became an obsession. In an age where science seeks to answer even the most unthinkable questions, a group of researchers took a leap into the unknown. What they proposed was as controversial as it was groundbreaking: installing a camera inside a coffin to observe what happens after burial. To many, the concept was deeply unsettling, even grotesque. Critics called it a desecration of the dead, an affront to nature, and a violation of moral boundaries. Religious leaders condemned the idea as sacrilegious, warning that it could disturb forces beyond human comprehension. Online forums buzzed with outrage, fear, and in some cases, morbid curiosity. But the scientists were undeterred. Their argument was simple: humanity's greatest leaps forward have always come from asking the questions others were too afraid to pose. "We are not trying to disrespect the dead," said Dr. Eleanor Hartman, the lead researcher and a renowned anthropologist. "We are trying to understand a fundamental part of the human experience, one that has remained cloaked in mystery for far too long." The project was not without its challenges. Securing funding was nearly impossible, with most institutions unwilling to associate their names with something so controversial. Ethical committees debated the proposal for months, questioning its morality and the potential psychological effects on those involved. Could this experiment open a door that should remain closed? Was it worth the risk to venture into such uncharted territory? The debates raged on, but in the end, curiosity won. The team received a private grant from an anonymous donor, a figure whose motives were as enigmatic as the experiment itself. As the project began to take shape, the team faced another daunting task: finding a volunteer. This would not be a controlled laboratory experiment. It required a human subject, someone willing to be buried with the camera. The logistics alone were staggering. The camera had to withstand extreme conditions: total darkness, high pressure, and the inevitable decay that comes with burial. But the biggest hurdle, the greatest psychological challenge, was finding someone who would volunteer for such a fate, who could confront the ultimate fear and allow their final moments to become the subject of scientific scrutiny. The question lingered until James Porter stepped forward, a man whose name would become forever linked to one of the most chilling experiments in modern history. But before we introduce him, let's consider the implications of what the scientists were about to do. To install a camera inside a coffin was not merely a technical challenge, it was a philosophical leap, a step into the unknown that could either shed light on the mysteries of death or unleash questions far darker than anyone anticipated. Are you ready to follow them into the abyss? To witness what lies beyond the veil, where science meets the supernatural, and logic begins to crumble under the weight of the inexplicable? Hold your breath, because what comes next will chill you to the bone. James Porter was not an extraordinary man by traditional standards. He wasn't a celebrity or a scholar. He didn't hold an advanced degree or a claim to fame. Yet, when his name surfaced as the volunteer for the most controversial scientific experiment of the century, the world suddenly knew who he was. James was a 47-year-old father of two, a retired librarian from a small Midwestern town. His life had been simple, filled with the quiet joys of family, books, and gardening. But James was facing a terminal diagnosis, an aggressive form of cancer that had left him with only months to live. When the scientists first approached him, they did so delicately, knowing the nature of their request was unlike anything anyone had ever asked. James listened calmly as they explained the project. There was no hesitation in his eyes, no flicker of fear. Instead, he asked them one question: "Why me?" The answer was both practical and profound. His condition, the researchers explained, offered a unique opportunity. He would already be facing burial soon, and his consent would allow them to document the process from a perspective never before captured. But it wasn't just practicality that made James the perfect candidate. There was something in his demeanor, a quiet acceptance of his fate, that suggested he had already made peace with his mortality. He wasn't just a subject for the experiment, he was its soul. James's family, however, was less accepting. His wife, Margaret, wept when she heard the proposal. "This is madness," she said, her voice breaking. "You're not a science experiment, James. You're my husband. You're their father." Their children, teenagers still grappling with the impending loss of their father, were equally torn. To them, the idea seemed cruel, an unnecessary addition to the pain they were already enduring. But James saw it differently. "Margaret," he said gently one evening as they sat on their porch, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and red, "this is something I can give back. I've always believed that knowledge is the most powerful thing we can leave behind. If I can help answer even one small question about what happens after we go, then my life, my death, will have meant something more." The conversation was long, filled with tears, anger, and eventually, a quiet, reluctant understanding. Margaret didn't agree, not fully, but she respected her husband's choice. And so, with his family's reluctant blessing, James committed to the experiment. The preparations began almost immediately. The scientists wanted every detail to be perfect, knowing that the eyes of the world would be on this project. James underwent a series of medical evaluations were conducted, not to prolong James's life but to ensure the experiment could proceed as planned. Each step brought him closer to the moment that would mark both an end and a beginning. The coffin itself was a marvel of engineering. Outwardly, it looked no different from any other, a simple wooden box with brass handles, unadorned and humble, just as James had requested. But inside, it was equipped with state-of-the-art technology. A small, high-definition camera was installed at one end, designed to capture even the faintest movements in the confined space. It was accompanied by an array of sensors to measure temperature, pressure, and even sound. The scientists wanted to account for every possible variable to ensure that no phenomenon could be dismissed as a fluke. The day of the burial arrived under a somber sky, the clouds heavy with the threat of rain. James's family and a handful of close friends gathered at the cemetery for a small, private ceremony. Despite the extraordinary circumstances, the funeral itself was heartbreakingly ordinary. Margaret clutched a bouquet of lilies, her face pale and drawn. James's children stood silently beside her, their eyes red-rimmed but dry. They had cried all their tears in the days leading up to this moment. James, lying in his coffin, looked serene. Dressed in his favorite sweater, a soft, worn garment that Margaret had knit for him years ago, he seemed at peace. The camera inside the coffin had already been activated, its tiny red light barely visible in the shadows. As the lid was lowered, the air grew heavy with a mixture of grief and tension. It was the last time anyone would see James as he had been in life. The burial itself was both solemn and clinical. The coffin was lowered into the freshly dug grave, the sound of ropes sliding against the wood echoing in the stillness. A few shovels of earth were thrown in as part of the ritual, but the rest of the grave was filled in by machinery as the scientists monitored every step of the process. Each layer of soil was carefully measured, ensuring the conditions inside the coffin were as realistic as possible. For the scientists, this moment was the culmination of months of planning and years of speculation. They stood by, their faces a mixture of anticipation and unease. This was not just another experiment. It was a journey into the unknown, one that could yield answers or open doors they had no idea how to close. As the final layer of earth was smoothed over, a strange silence settled over the cemetery. The family left, their grief too raw for words, leaving only the scientists and the technology that now connected the world of the living with the realm of the dead. In that moment, the weight of what they were doing became almost unbearable. Somewhere beneath their feet, James Porter lay in his coffin, the camera's lens fixed on the darkness, waiting to capture whatever might come next. For the first several hours, the camera feed revealed nothing but stillness. The screen displayed the interior of the coffin, illuminated by faint infrared light. Every detail was visible: the texture of the coffin's wooden interior, the soft folds of James's sweater, and the slight rise and fall of his chest as his body's final moments played out. The room where the scientists monitored the feed was eerily quiet, filled only with the hum of equipment and the occasional murmur of subdued conversation. They had prepared themselves for uneventfulness. After all, the experiment was as much about observing the absence of activity as it was about uncovering the unknown. As the hours stretched on, the atmosphere shifted from tense anticipation to a kind of somber routine. The scientists noted minor details: the gradual cooling of the coffin's interior, the faint sounds of shifting soil as the earth settled around it. These were expected phenomena, easily explained and catalogued. By the 10th hour, some of the team began to relax. Conversations grew louder, more casual. Some even began to wonder if the experiment would yield anything remarkable at all. Then, at precisely the 11-hour mark, a faint tapping sound was picked up by the microphone inside the coffin. It was so soft that, at first, only one of the technicians noticed it. "Did anyone hear that?" he asked, his voice cutting through the chatter. The room fell silent as everyone turned their attention to the audio feed. There it was again, faint, rhythmic, like knuckles gently rapping against wood. At first, the team dismissed it as a natural phenomenon. Perhaps it was the sound of soil shifting under pressure or the coffin settling deeper into the ground. But as the minutes passed, the tapping grew louder, more deliberate. It seemed to echo from within the coffin itself, as if something, or someone, was making contact with the wooden lid. The scientists exchanged uneasy glances. "It's probably nothing," Dr. Hartman said, her tone steady, though her expression betrayed her unease. "Let's monitor it closely and see if it continues." It did. The tapping persisted for another 20 minutes, then stopped abruptly, leaving behind an unnerving silence. For a while, nothing happened. The scientists began to speculate again, searching for rational explanations. But their theories were cut short when the camera feed captured something impossible to ignore. The folds of James's sweater, which had been perfectly still for hours, began to shift. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, like a slight breeze had disturbed the fabric. But there was no breeze inside the coffin. As the team watched in stunned silence, the movement became more pronounced. The sweater appeared to ripple as though unseen fingers were brushing against it. Then came the sound, a soft, almost inaudible rustling, like fabric being disturbed. The microphone picked it up clearly, broadcasting it into the observation room where the scientists sat frozen. "Is there something in there with him?" one of them whispered, his voice barely audible. Before anyone could respond, a new phenomenon emerged on the video feed. A faint imprint began to appear on the fabric of the coffin's interior lining. At first, it was shapeless, a vague depression. But as the team watched, the imprint became more defined, unmistakably resembling the shape of a hand pressing against the fabric from the inside. The room erupted into chaos. Voices overlapped as theories were thrown out, each one more desperate than the last. "It's just the pressure of the soil," one scientist insisted, though his voice wavered with uncertainty. "Maybe the camera's picking up distortions," another suggested, though the clarity of the image left little room for doubt. As if to silence their speculations, the handprint vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving the lining smooth and undisturbed. For a moment, the room was deathly quiet. Then the shadow appeared. It was faint at first, a barely noticeable shift in the lighting inside the coffin. But as the scientists adjusted the feed, it became clearer, a dark, indistinct shape moving slowly across the frame. It didn't resemble anything human. It was formless, almost like smoke, but heavier, more deliberate in its movements. The shadow drifted across James's still body, pausing briefly near his face before dissipating into the darkness. "Are we all seeing this?" Dr. Hartman asked, her voice tight with controlled panic. The team nodded, their eyes glued to the screen. No one dared to look away, afraid of missing what might come next. The tension in the room was palpable, the kind that makes your skin crawl and your heart race. The scientists, trained to remain objective and analytical, found themselves grappling with an overwhelming sense of dread. They had set out to observe the natural processes of death, but what they were witnessing defied all logic and explanation. As the hours wore on, the phenomena became more frequent and more unsettling. The tapping returned, now accompanied by faint whispers that the audio equipment struggled to capture. The words were unintelligible, more like a breathy murmur than speech, but they carried an unmistakable tone of urgency. At one point, the camera feed flickered briefly, plunging the observation room into darkness. When it stabilized, the scientists were horrified to see that James's body had shifted slightly. His head, which had been resting gently against the pillow, was now tilted at an unnatural angle. His face was turned toward the camera. His eyes remained closed, but there was something about his expression, something almost aware, that sent chills down their spines. As the clock ticked closer to the 24-hour mark, the team could no longer deny the truth. They were witnessing events that defied every law of nature. The boundary between the scientific and the supernatural had blurred, and they were standing on the edge of an abyss they could not begin to comprehend. The tension in the observation room had reached a fever pitch when the events took a turn no one could have foreseen. The scientists, once so confident in their understanding of the natural world, now sat paralyzed with fear and confusion. The Coffin's camera feed had become a portal into something they could neither explain nor control, and what they were about to witness would shatter their perception of reality. It began with the mist. At first, it was barely noticeable, a faint, almost imperceptible haze at the edges of the camera frame. The scientists thought it might be condensation, a natural byproduct of the Coffin's sealed environment. But as the minutes passed, the mist grew thicker, coalescing into tendrils that seemed to move with purpose. The hazy strands curled and twisted, slowly converging at the center of the Coffin, directly above James's motionless body. The mist didn't behave like any known gas or vapor. It wasn't dissipating or spreading evenly, as condensation would. Instead, it appeared to gather mass, becoming denser and more defined. It pulsed faintly as though responding to an unseen force, and its movements carried an eerie rhythm, like a slow, deliberate heartbeat. "What the hell is that?" one of the technicians whispered, his voice trembling. No one answered. All eyes were locked on the screen as the mist began to take shape. What had started as an amorphous cloud now bore the vague outline of a human figure, shoulders, arms, a head. They weren't fully formed, more like suggestions of features, but the resemblance was undeniable. The figure hovered just above James, its presence impossible to ignore. The room was silent except for the rapid clicking of keyboards as the team recorded every second of the phenomenon. Then came the sound. It was soft at first, almost imperceptible, a faint hum, low and resonant, that seemed to emanate from the figure itself. Mystery. To emanate from the figure itself, the hum grew louder, vibrating through the speakers with an otherworldly quality that made the scientist's skin crawl. It wasn't just a sound, it was a feeling, a deep, penetrating sensation that seemed to resonate in their very bones. Suddenly, the mist figure moved. It leaned closer to James, its vague head tilting as if observing him. The hum shifted, rising and falling in a pattern that almost resembled speech, though no words could be discerned. The figure's face drew nearer to James, and for a brief moment, it appeared as though the two were connected by an invisible thread, something intangible but undeniably real. Then, as abruptly as it had appeared, the mist changed again. It began to condense, pulling inward, shrinking until it was no larger than a small pulsating orb. The orb hovered directly above James's chest, glowing faintly with a light that seemed to come from within. The scientist leaned forward, their breaths held, as the orb descended. It hovered just inches above James's body before sinking into his chest and vanishing entirely. The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, nothing happened. The camera feed showed James lying still, exactly as he had been before. Then the scratching began. The sound was harsh and sudden, like nails dragging against wood. It reverberated through the observation room, sending shivers down the spines of everyone present. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, and as the scientists watched in horror, words began to appear on the inside of the coffin lid, etched as if by an unseen hand. The words were simple but chilling. "Why am I here?" The etching process was visible on the camera feed, each letter appearing in real time, carved into the wood by an invisible force. The question hung in the air, unanswerable and agonizing. The scientists were too stunned to speak, their minds racing to process what they were seeing. This was no longer just an experiment, it was a confrontation with something beyond their understanding, something that defied every law of nature and reason. As they struggled to make sense of the situation, the camera feed flickered. The image distorted, lines of static cutting across the screen. When the feed stabilized, the coffin was empty. James's body was gone. Panic erupted in the observation room. "Check the sensors," one scientist shouted, his voice cracking. "Where is he? What's happening?" The sensors inside the coffin showed nothing unusual, no changes in pressure, no signs of movement, no disturbances in the surrounding soil. It was as if James had simply ceased to exist. The team scrambled to find answers, but there were none. The coffin was empty, and no one could explain how or why. Amid the chaos, the audio feed crackled to life. A single phrase echoed through the speakers, faint but unmistakable. "Thank you for letting me go." The voice was James's. The scientists froze. The voice was calm, almost serene, and it carried a weight that silenced every other thought in the room. It was the first and only time James had spoken since the experiment began, and his words left the team with more questions than answers. Moments later, the feed cut out entirely, plunging the room into darkness. When power was restored, the equipment was intact, but the camera was no longer transmitting. It was as if the experiment itself had come to an end, as if whatever forces had been at play had decided that the time for observation was over. In the days that followed, the scientists reviewed the footage obsessively, searching for clues, patterns, anything that might explain what they had witnessed. But no amount of analysis could unravel the mystery. James's body was never recovered. The coffin was exhumed and found to be intact, its interior undisturbed except for the etched words, "Why am I here?" The team was left grappling with the implications of what they had witnessed. Was it a glimpse into the afterlife, a manifestation of James's spirit, or something far stranger, something humanity wasn't meant to understand? The experiment had answered no questions. Instead, it had opened a door to a realm of possibilities that no one was prepared to face. Dr. Hartman, the project's lead, spoke publicly only once after the experiment concluded. Her words were haunting in their simplicity. "Some questions should remain unanswered. We've seen things that cannot be explained, and perhaps that's how it's meant to be." The experiment's findings were buried, both figuratively and literally. The footage, the data, and the coffin itself were sealed away, hidden from the world. But for those who had been there, the memory could not be buried. It lingered like a shadow, a reminder that some mysteries are best left undisturbed. In the weeks following the experiment, the lab became a hushed and somber place. The equipment sat idle, the monitors dark, and the researchers avoided the observation room where they had witnessed events that defied every law of nature and logic. The team disbanded quietly, each member retreating to their private thoughts, burdened by the weight of what they had seen. None of them were the same. Some left science altogether, unable to reconcile their training with the inexplicable phenomena they had documented. Others became obsessed, poring over the footage in private, searching for answers that would never come. Dr. Hartman, the project's lead scientist, bore the heaviest burden. She had been the one to champion the experiment, to push for its approval despite the ethical concerns and societal backlash. Now, she found herself haunted by the results. She replayed James's final words in her mind endlessly. "Thank you for letting me go." What had he meant? Where had he gone? And, perhaps most chillingly, was he grateful for what they had done, or was his statement a condemnation disguised as gratitude? In a rare interview, Dr. Hartman shared her thoughts, though her words were cryptic and unsettling. "We set out to answer one question," she said, "but in doing so, we uncovered 1,000 more. I've dedicated my life to understanding the human experience, to peeling back the layers of mystery that shroud life and death. But now I wonder if some mysteries are meant to remain untouched. Perhaps the veil exists not just to obscure, but to protect." The public's response to the experiment was as polarized as it had been when the project was first announced. News outlets around the world ran sensational headlines: "Coffin experiment opens door to afterlife," and "Man's final words leave scientists speechless." Online forums erupted with debates. Some hailed the experiment as a groundbreaking step toward understanding the metaphysical, while others decried it as a grotesque violation of nature and human dignity. Conspiracy theories flourished, with claims ranging from government cover-ups to accusations that the entire project was an elaborate hoax. But the footage was real, and those who saw it could not deny its authenticity. Leaked snippets appeared online, sparking a frenzy of analysis and speculation. The image of the mist-like figure hovering above James's body, words etched into the coffin lid, and the eerie sound of James's voice saying, "Thank you for letting me go," became the subject of endless scrutiny. Skeptics tried to debunk the footage, citing camera malfunctions, optical illusions, or outright fabrication. However, for many, the images were too vivid, too unexplainable, to be dismissed. Despite the public's hunger for answers, the full recording was never released. The experiment sponsors, an anonymous group whose identity remains a mystery, sealed the footage, the data, and the coffin itself in a secure facility, inaccessible to anyone outside their circle. For the scientists involved, this decision was both a relief and a source of frustration. They were free from the burden of public scrutiny but also denied the chance to fully explore the implications of their work. The only piece of evidence that remained in circulation was the etched question, "Why am I here?" It became a rallying cry for philosophers, theologians, and armchair theorists alike. What did it mean? Was it a question of existential anguish, a cry for understanding, or something more sinister? Some interpreted it as a literal inquiry, a soul trapped between life and death, seeking answers from those who had disturbed its rest. Others believed it was a reflection of humanity's eternal struggle to find meaning in the face of mortality. For James's family, the experiment left wounds that time struggled to heal. Margaret, his widow, refused to speak publicly about her husband's involvement. She returned to her small Midwestern town, raising their children away from the glare of the media. In private, she admitted to friends that she often felt James's presence in their home, fleeting glimpses of him in reflections, the sound of his voice in moments of stillness. "I don't know if it's my mind playing tricks on me," she confided once, "or if he's trying to tell me something." The most profound impact, however, was on the audience. The millions who followed the story, debated its implications, and grappled with its unanswered questions. The experiment became more than just a scientific endeavor. It became a mirror reflecting humanity's deepest fears and curiosities. It forced people to confront their own mortality, to question what lies beyond, and to consider the possibility that some answers might be too terrifying to know. For those watching, the final moments of the experiment remain the most haunting. James's voice, calm and deliberate, saying, "Thank you for letting me go." What did he mean? Where had he gone? And perhaps most chillingly, what if he hadn't gone anywhere at all? What if the experiment had merely shifted the boundary, opening a door that could never be closed? As the story of the experiment faded from headlines, it left behind a legacy of uncertainty. The question, "Why am I here?" lingered in the minds of all who encountered it, a reminder that the greatest mysteries are not those we uncover, but those we create when we dare to look beyond the veil. For you, the audience, the story does not end here. What do you believe happened inside that coffin? Was it a glimpse into the afterlife, a distortion of reality, or something far stranger than either? Do you think humanity should continue to push the boundaries of the unknown, or are there some questions best left unanswered? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know what you think and join the conversation. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with others who are ready to question the very nature of existence. After all, this is not just a story, it's an invitation to explore the limits of what we know and to confront the mysteries that lie just beyond our reach.